Hey there, night owls. Welcome back to our late-night history voyages. If this is your first time drifting in with us, tap that like button. Only if you're genuinely curious about the shadows of the past. And consider subscribing for more sleepy explorations that I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments and tell me, what time is it on your clock right now? Are you winding down after dinner or just turning in for the night? Wherever you are, make yourself comfortable, grab a blanket, maybe slip on some cozy socks that we're about to embark on a journey through Viking longships under moonlight. So settle in, get cozy, and let's set our sails into history's quietest hours. Now, dim the lights around you until your room feels like a hidden cove beneath the night sky. If you have a fan or a gentle breeze, turn it on. Let that soft hum lull your thoughts. Perhaps light a candle or plug in a warm, low-wattage lamp. Just enough glow to see, never too bright. Take a slow, calming breath in and exhale any haste or worry. Tonight, we sail silently on moonlit waters. Let the hush of the evening guide you into our tale. Hollywood often paints the Vikings as roaring barbarians, helmets crowned with horns, axes raised high, charging under blood-red skies. Yet the real Norse raiders moved quite differently. They prized silence over spectacle, patience over panic. Imagine longships slipping through still fjords, sails furled, rowers paused, only the soft hiss of water against tar-soaked planks. Under a moonless sky, they became shadows on the waves, masters of surprise before dawn's first light. Tonight, we'll burst open these myths and trace their true art of night raids, exploring secret tide charts, starlit navigation, and the hush-heavy design of those slender vessels. By journey's end, you'll understand why villages awoke to vanished treasures, and why Viking triumphs often whispered rather than roared. So, lean back, let the hush of evening settle around you, and join me as we unravel the hidden strategies of Viking longship night raids that you've probably seen Vikings storming castle walls in broad daylight. Axes glinting under a blazing sun, shields clashing in glorious battle. But the real masters of Norse raiding learned early that silence often carried further than a war cry. Tonight, we'll peel back the Hollywood gloss and step into the shadowed world of pre-dawn Viking assaults. Picture a sleepy coastal village in the late 8th century. Thatched roofs lie quiet beneath a star-pricked sky. Fishing boats bob gently in the moonlit harbor. Lanterns flicker behind shuttered windows. Guards long since dozed at their posts. Then, without a sound louder than a feather's fall, longships slip inshore. The oars make no clatter, the planks disturb no stones. By the time bells toll the morning hour, the invaders have vanished like ghosts, leaving only echoes of fear. Let's begin with the sagas. In Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, there's an account of King Olav Tryggvason's early career when he launched a raid against a monastery on the Scottish coast. According to the saga, Olav and his men waited until the moon sank below the horizon, no pale glow to betray their approach. They rowed for hours in near-total darkness, guided solely by whispered commands and the faint outline of the shoreline. When they reached land, they paused for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds, the breath of the sea breeze, the soft shift of leather-soled boots, the distant roll of tide. Then, almost as if on cue, the raiders sprang from their boats. Monks woke to footfalls on stone and hoods pulled over startled faces. The monastery fell so quickly that survivors claimed they never saw a single torchlight or heard even a single shout before the cloister gates were breached. Archaeological clues from Hedeby and Ribe tales echo in the records of archaeologists. At the ancient trading settlement of Hedeby in modern Germany, excavators have uncovered storehouses packed with grain sacks stamped in the early hours, some bearing marks that suggest removal before sunrise. Grain spores trace faint footprints leading away from the warehouses, heading toward hidden landing spots. Further north, in Ribe on the Danish coast, a recently unearthed boathouse contained fragments of tar-soaked wool and damp linen. Materials experts now believe were treated not for warmth, but to silence or strokes and dampen wood creaks. These finds align with pollen-dated seabed cores showing adrenaline-linked biomarkers in coastal mud layers, tiny chemical traces that spike precisely around the darkest hours. Physiological edge. Human sleep rhythms. Why night? Biology helps explain. By 2 a.m., the human body's cortisol levels reach a nadir and melatonin peaks, deepening sleep's grip. Studies of modern sentry rotations show that even trained night guards struggle to maintain vigilance after prolonged darkness. Faces soften in the dim glow, eyes grow heavy. Vikings seized this weakness. They timed their target approaches for what they called the witching tide, when tide and darkness conspired to lull defenders into slumber. A sentry half asleep might glimpse a shadow on the water and dismiss it as a gull or drifting debris. By the time alarm drums sounded, the longship's crew had already slipped away or moved to the next target. Tactical mastery, tides, moon phases, and charts. Navigators studied the moon's cycle as carefully as they studied the waves. On new moon nights, when lunar light vanished, they chose landing spots near rocky outcrops to mask their silhouette. On nights of a thin crescent, they timed landings just before moonset, when a sliver of silver vanished below the horizon. Monastic records from the Isle of Man detail tide tables scrawled in margin notes, likely copied from Norse visitors. High tide falls at cockcrow, then rise again ere dawn. Such marginalia hint that Vikings shared, or sometimes leaked, their slip-in, slip-out schedules to sow confusion among coastal defenders. Psychological warfare in darkness warped perception. Villagers, roused from deep sleep, heard only muffled thuds against wood or the whisper of a cloak brushing cobblestones. Their minds raced to worst-case scenarios. Was it a marauder, a ghost, or the wind? In one Irish annal, a priest described hearing soft singing during a raid. Viking war chants carried by a gust, then snuffed out as if plucked from the air. The raiders used quiet battle horns, small conch shells held close to lips, emitting a low drone barely audible at 50 paces. This subtle hum disoriented cattle and startled sentries, who turned in confusion just as axes fell. Comparative cases. Beyond Lindisfarne, of course, Lindisfarne in 793 AD remains the textbook example. But similar tactics surfaced across the North Sea. Iona, 806 AD. Gaelic chronicles recount men in darkness who looted relics from the abbey church, leaving candles untouched and altars intact, suggesting precision. Take only what needed, remain unseen, depart before prayers resumed. Frisia, 841 AD. Coastal defenses installed floating bells that rang when tides rose too close. Yet raiders learned to drape cloth over the bells, muting chimes as they passed. Defenders awoke only to empty moats. Seine Delta, 845 AD. A Viking flotilla targeted bridge fortifications near Paris. Attackers rode under cloud cover, emerging in the fog bank where river and mist merged. The fog, combined with near-silent oars, created the perfect cover. Soldiers on guard saw shadows as specters and fled. Debunking the dawn charge myth, these examples demolished the idea of a daylight-only assault. Vikings knew that the best ambush came not with fanfare, but with a whisper. They observed wind patterns. A breeze from the north meant colder winds that muffled human breath. They timed landings on ebb tides to avoid drag. They clipped swords at the crossguard, reducing metal chatter. All this so that when the rooster crowed, when the first church bell tolled, and when the baker lit the morning hearth, the Vikings were already gone. Treasures in tow, camps untouched, and defenders left bewildered. Transition to next section. So much for the sunlit frenzy. We've stripped away the bright banners and the midday charges, and seen instead a methodical, shadow-driven art. Next, we'll slip aboard those whisper-quiet vessels and peer at the very design features that let longships glide like spirits through the night. Having shattered the myth of the Viking dawn charge, we now turn our gaze to the very vessels that made nocturnal raids possible. Over the next 8 minutes, we'll dissect the ingenious design and subtle modifications that transformed the longship into a whisper on the waves. Picture a longship gliding beneath a starless sky. Its hull so low it seems to float invisibly, like a phantom skimming glassy water. No roar of engine, no thrum of paddle, only the soft hiss where wood meets tide. Tonight, we explore how Viking shipwrights engineered these vessels for stealth, drawing on generations of coastal lore, hands-on experimentation, and a deep understanding of their northern seas. At first glance, a Viking longship appears elegant, even delicate. Its hull rises only about 3 to 4 feet above the waterline, barely enough to break the surface. This slim profile had two crucial effects. First, it reduced the ship's silhouette against dark backdrops, and second, it minimized wave disturbance, so that each vessel left almost no telltale ripple. Shipwrights achieved this by meticulously shaping the keel and planking. Using adze and draw knife, they carved the keel from a single oak trunk, tapering it at both ends to slip through currents. Planks, often split rather than sawn, followed the natural curvature of the tree, producing a smooth, hydrodynamic form that a shallow draft of just 2 to 3 feet meant longships could approach beaches and riverbanks within yards of shore. Villagers on watch saw only darkness and still water. During an 11th century raid on the Irish coast, chroniclers noted that ships rested upon the sands as if laid by the hand of the gods, so minimal was their draft. Even under a faint moon, defenders scanning distant horizons would spot nothing more than the faintest undulation. By choosing nights of slack wind, Vikings ensured that their hulls, bound by wrought iron rivets, never creaked. A testament to both craftsmanship and careful material selection, stealth depends on silence, and silence begins with the wood. Vikings favored slow-grown oak from sheltered valleys, prized for its density and resistance to splinter. Pine and larch supplemented oak, providing flexible top planks that absorbed shocks rather than snapping. Once felled, timber underwent a half-year of seasoning, stacked with spacers to promote even drying. Shipwrights knew that over-dry would warps, under-dry would cracks. Their timing coincided with late autumn felling, when sap levels dropped, ensuring planks would swell slightly in damp air. Sealing seams snugly to further mute hull-to-water noise. Caulking crews drove bundles of sheeps while dipped in pine tar into plank joints. The resinous tar hardened just enough to block leaks, yet remained pliable, dampening the slap of waves. Archaeologists at York have uncovered remnants of tar-soaked wool consistent with this method, alongside iron caulking needles used to weave fibers tightly. Even internal framing followed stealth principles. Ribs lay slightly recessed, covered by a thin layer of linden or alder, the latter known to produce minimal echo when footsteps crossed deck. By wrapping beams in animal hide and using leather washers under deck boards, the Vikings created floating floors that swallowed sound. Canvas may conjure sails billowing in wind, but Norse sails served a subtler purpose. Woven from wool and linen, often bleached in sunlight and treated with animal fat, they resisted flapping even in light breezes. Sailmakers applied repeated coats of cod or seal oil, saturating fibers so wind passed through the weave, not over it. This oil-damped sail absorbed gusts quietly. When furled, it lay limp against the mast, emitting no telltale rustle that in near-calm conditions, captains would hove to, trim the sail to hold position with minimal motion, allowing crews to rest while the vessel drifted. No oars, no wind, no noise, just the gentle lull of water moving past tarred planks. In this state, longships could wait offshore for hours, invisible and unheard. When wind and tide proved unreliable, the oar remained king. Yet each stroke risked betraying position. To counter this, Vikings refined both oarlocks and oar design. Traditional wooden oarlocks produced a sharp nick as rowlocks met or shafts. Vikings replaced bare wood with leather sleeves soaked in fish oil. When hardened, these sleeves formed a smooth, bearing surface, so quiet that a well-trained crew could maintain 8 knots without a single clatter. Oars themselves were hewn from lighter ash or spruce, then sanded to a polished finish. Blades widened near the tip and sometimes featured a slight curvature to maximize water grip, reducing the need for forceful strokes. Less force meant less noise. Each oarsman wrapped his hands in thin strips of wool cloth, preventing the soft gloves from slipping when wet and simultaneously muffling the soft thud of hands against her handles. Under deck, foot braces lined with moss and leather prevented heel clacks as crews braced for long pulls. Beyond hull and oar, Vikings mastered microtactics for pure invisibility. Before a raid, crews removed non-essential metal fittings, nails, decorative studs, even some iron brackets, stowing them below deck. Fewer exposed metal surfaces meant no sparks if struck, no reflections under starlight. Ships bore simple camouflage, hulls painted with earth pigments, ochre, charcoal, clay, to mimic shoreline rock. In one 12th century saga, an island settlement recounted a raid so silent that defenders assumed the silhouettes were driftwood until cold steel rang out at the quay. But on particularly dark nights, Vikings would attach bundles of reeds or kelp along gunwales, breaking up the vessel's outline when viewed from afar. This reed edging, tied with natural fiber ropes, rustled only faintly in wind, blending the longship into the reeds and rushes lining many Scandinavian shores. Oh, there we have it. The longship's ghostly low profile, its whisper-quiet hull, oil-soaked sails, leather-lined oars, and even reed-mottled camouflage, all designed for one purpose: invisibility on the waves. These innovations allowed Vikings to slip into harbors undetected, strike with precision, and vanish before dawn could muster resistance. They turned engineering into a weapon as potent as any sword. Next, we'll meet the crews who manned these marvels, captains, lookouts, and warriors alike, and learn how their roles intertwined with the ship's stealth to form a perfectly synchronized raiding machine. At the ship's stern stood the steersman, or Strymar, guiding the helm as water plankton glowed beneath the rudder's turn. Trained by decades at sea, he sensed hidden currents and shifting shoals by touch alone. Beside him, the navigator, often a veteran raider or learned skald, mapped the course using a cracked sundial, a polished sunstone, and an intimate knowledge of the night sky. They read faint star glimmers and whispered instructions so softly that not even creaking would betray their presence. Together, they formed the mission's brain, steering ghostly hulls towards silent victory. Even the most seasoned steersmen relied on coastal pilots, specialists whose instincts were forged in mist-shrouded fishing coves. These pilots memorized every rocky promontory, hidden channel, and shifting sandbar along familiar shores. When the fleet neared unknown coasts, the lead longship halted, and a pilot slipped into a skiff. Guided by only a whisper of wind and the feel of water on his oars, he darted ahead to scout safe landing spots. Back on board, he tapped a coded rhythm on the hull: 2 knocks for an open beach, 3 for a narrow river mouth. Tide masters worked in tandem, consulting driftwood tide poles carved with rune marks to forecast flood and ebb cycles. They studied lunar phases and even bird migrations. Flocks spiraling low at dusk meant shallow reefs, while seals hauled on sandbanks hinted at hidden shoals. Monks on the Isle of Man recorded these observations in margin notes. High tide at cockcrow, they wrote, perhaps copied from Norse raiders themselves, a subtle psychological ploy in a famous West Norse saga. A pilot named Orgeir guided 12 longships under a new moon sky into a reed-choked inlet. His silent signals led the fleet to a hidden cove, where they struck a monastery and vanished before dawn. It was this lethal fusion of lore, observation, and coded communication that let Vikings slip ashore unnoticed and depart with equal grace. When silence was paramount, the oarsmen became the heartbeat of the raid. Recruited from seasoned seafarers, they trained in hushed drills at twilight. Oarlocks were wrapped in fish oil-soaked leather, creating a whisper-quiet bearing that let dozens of oars slice through water without a clatter. Deck braces lined with moss and leather prevented heel clacks, while oars hewn from polished ash and spruce boasted curved blades for a smooth, efficient pull. During a winter raid in 995 AD, crews rowed for 12 hours under cloud cover. Their muscle memory so refined they counted strokes by feel alone at prearranged intervals, timed by dripping hemp water clocks. Rowers shifted positions without spoken command. Hands wrapped in woolen strips prevented blisters and muffled any soft thuds. When the tide was right, oars were stowed inside the hull, allowing the longship to drift like a phantom. In that moment, the vessel truly became one silent entity, creeping toward its quarry under a veil of darkness. Lookouts perched on prow and stern platforms called oarlog stalls, their eyes adapted to near-pitch black. Using hollowed scallop shells as makeshift binoculars, they could spot flickering torchlight or distant watchtower flames over a mile away. Instead of shouting, they tapped coded rhythms on the mast: 2 taps for safe, 3 for blocked, and a rapid sequence for hostiles nearby. Crews memorized these codes as instinct. A misread could strand a ship on hidden shoals. Some veterans carried polished bronze signal mirrors, flashing pinpoint beams to coordinate multi-ship maneuvers across comm channels. In total blackout operations, hollowed rams' horns muffled by leather coverings emitted low pulses, audible only within 50 yards, perfect for synchronizing landings. Local legends recall a lookout named Skrymer who, in 1021 AD, tapped 3 quick raps on his hull, warning of submerged rocks off the Isle of Man. His alert allowed the fleet to delay landing until tides shifted, saving lives and plunder. In every raid, lookouts were the fleet's silent eyes and ears, essential for a strike under cover of night. At the heart of the operation stood the warriors, faces hooded, hands gripping axes and seekses. Raiders organized into elite vanguards and disciplined ranks, each unit perfected for silent assault. Berserkers, or Ulfanar, led the charge. Foregoing heavy armor, they trained in controlled breath techniques to mask exhalations and practiced rapid, single-strike kills in darkness. Their war chants, muted by hood-lined masks, carried only enough to disorient livestock and rattle sentries, never to wake an entire village. Shield maidens and veteran raiders formed the silent shield circle. Their boss shields, lashed in dark linen and painted with earth pigments, absorbed moonlight rather than reflecting it. Each raider carried a tar-dipped dagger and a small throwing axe strapped to the thigh, tools of precision rather than brute force. Prior to departure, weapons were anointed with fish oil and ash, a crude anti-rust coating that also dulled metal glint. For stealth kills, raiders used serrated seekses, narrow blades designed to slip between armor links. Irish annals describe attackers entering farmhouses through loft hatches, dispatching guards so quietly that only the first startled breath betrayed the raid. Covert signals, charred wood whistles muffled by hide, coordinated multi-pronged assaults. A single blast meant hold position, 2 meant advance, 3 meant loot and withdraw. These whistles, audible only within a small radius, let raiding parties spread to multiple targets without raising a unified alarm. Exfiltration. Rearguard shock troops planted sharpened stakes studded with iron at the shore's edge, slowing pursuit. Shield lines reversed into a defensive rampart, covering oarsmen as they launched back into the dark sea. When dawn's first light peeked over hills, the Viking exit was as coordinated as the entry, a testament to battlefield discipline cloaked in legendary ferocity. Every silent strike relied on meticulous support. The quartermaster, or scafera, managed provisions, dried fish, hard cheese, and barley cakes sealed in oilskin bundles, balancing weight for stealthy landings. He tracked rope lengths, spare oarlocks, and arrowheads, ensuring the fleet carried only essentials. Medic shamans tended wounds with herbal poultices of yarrow and comfrey, woven into linen bandages. They mixed crushed garlic and honey to stave off infection when swords bit deep. During a winter raid on a Scottish abbey, their quick poulticing of a head wound kept a key pilot alive to guide the fleet home. These support crews worked silently below decks, their hushed footsteps muffled by layered hides and moss. Without them, rowers would falter, weapons would dull, and even the steersman's keen touch could slip. In the realm of night raids, every role, no matter how unseen, was vital to victory. Cohesion was the final ingredient. Crews drilled together at dusk, practicing silent embarkation and disembarkation. They learned to read each other's breathing patterns, to shift positions at water clock intervals, and to execute orders on a single whispered cue. Rituals preceded every raid. Rowers murmured protective runes. Warriors brushed iron blades against leather strips to quiet any clatter, and lookouts took oaths under starlit skies. This shared discipline forged bonds deeper than blood. Each man and woman became an extension of the vessel itself, united in purpose and silence. Oh, there you have them. The steersmen and navigators steering phantom ships through moonless seas, coastal pilots mapping hidden inlets, oarsmen orchestrating hushed propulsion, lookouts reading shadows for a single spark of light, shock troops striking with disciplined ferocity, and support crews preserving health and speed beneath the deck. Each role wove into a seamless tapestry, no individual act dominating, but every movement synchronized by whispered codes, taps, and subtle hisses that it was this collective mastery that turned longships into instruments of unseen terror. When dawn broke, survivors spoke not of thunderous war cries, but of ghostly hulls vanishing with their treasures. Next, we'll turn our gaze skyward, unveiling the celestial art of Viking navigation, reading stars, sunstones, and lunar cycles to guide these raiders across vast waters in absolute darkness. Oh, steady your breath. Let the hush of night deepen, and prepare to chart the heavens with me. Look up now, into the velvet black overhead, and you'll see the faintest pinpricks of starlight. For Viking navigators, these stars were far more than decoration. They were the very compass by which fleets crossed dark seas. At the heart of their system lay Polaris, the North Star, perched almost motionless above the Arctic Circle. By gauging its height above the horizon, steersmen estimated latitude to within a few miles. A remarkable feat when landmarks vanished beneath endless night. But what if clouds hid the heavens? Enter the fabled sunstones. Medieval chronicles and laboratory experiments hint at the use of birefringent crystals, like Iceland spar, to detect polarized light. Even on overcast nights, a sharp-eyed navigator could rotate the sunstone until a faint glow aligned with the crystal's axis, revealing the sun's hidden position. From there, they deduced cardinal directions and plotted courses with silent precision. Snorri Sturluson writes of a voyage in 1022 AD when Olafur Haraldsson's fleet skirted the stormy North Sea. Sails furled, rowers paused, and the navigator held aloft a sunstone against the gray sky. His whispered command, "East Star, hold fast," sent longships veering towards safety, miles off the rocky shoals. Beyond Polaris and sunstones, sailors memorized constellations. The W-shaped Cassiopeia, marking the northern horizon, the sweeping arc of Ursa Major pointing back to Polaris, and Orion's belt, which dipped beneath winter waves. These patterns offered checks and balances. If one star hid, another guided the way. Finally, during twilight's brief glow, navigators used a simple device called a primitive nocturnal, a circular disk marked with star positions and held against the sky. By aligning it with two bright stars, they read off the time and direction. Subtle cues that turned night itself into an open chart. Yet celestial methods alone could not guarantee a perfect approach. As the fleet neared shore, lookouts squinted for familiar silhouettes breaking the horizon's edge. Towering cliffs, church steeples, and the telltale curve of sandbars became ghostly signposts in the gloom. On the Swedish coast, pilots memorized the jagged outline of Gotland's limestone spires, visible even in eclipsed dark nights. Farther west, the twin pine peaks of Norway's Lofoten Islands appeared as shadowy pillars, markers for safe passage through narrow fjord mouths. Sound played a role, too. Gentle horn blasts, long, low notes pierced damp air without carrying far inland, served as confirmations. One tap meant approach is clear, two taps, halt and listen, three taps, enemy sighted. These signals originated in fishing communities, where dawn fishermen used reeds pressed to lips to call distant boats ashore. Vikings adapted the same reeds into miniature horns, muffling them with leather to prevent echoes that might alert watchmen. In 900 AD, a pilot named Kettle guided a small flotilla toward the Fife coast of Scotland. He paused half a mile out and released three soft blasts. A hidden companion answered with two taps from an overturned wooden bucket on shore. Satisfied, Kettle signaled the oarsmen to advance. By the time the Scottish sentries realized their mistake, Viking axes had already claimed the beach. Even the timber tone of oar shafts became a landmark. Pilots learned to recognize the pitch of their own fleet's leather-wrapped oars, distinguishing friend from foe on calm nights. This acoustic fingerprint prevented confusion when multiple squadrons converged under a single dark sky. Darkness and landmarks aside, tides and currents dictated the rhythm of every raid. Too early, and longships ran aground on hidden banks. Too late, and defenders roused by moonlit gleams could raise the alarm. Vikings kept driftwood tide poles carved with rune marks, simple staffs driven into sandflats to record the ebb and flow. By noting where the waterline met specific runes, crews knew when channels deepened enough to admit shallow draft vessels. Monastic annals on the Isle of Man contain charred sketches of such poles, annotated with marginal notes. Pole Rune 5. Flood at first cockcrow. Such entries suggest that Norse raiders shared, or perhaps leaked, their tidal secrets, a form of psychological warfare to undermine coastal vigilance. Beyond poles, raiders employed floating buoys rigged with bells. Tied near harbor mouths, these bells clanged when the tide lifted them against submerged rocks. Sentries hearing the gentle chime knew the tide favored landing. But clever Vikings sometimes muffled these bells with animal hides, rendering them silent until the fleet was almost ashore. Current patterns mattered as well. In the narrow straits between Orkney and Shetland, tidal races formed eddies strong enough to roll small coracles. Raiders studied these eddies, sometimes disembarking upstream and letting currents carry their vessels toward unsuspecting shores. The famous raid on the River Humber in 876 AD illustrates this mastery. Vikings entered the estuary on a rising tide, rode upstream past timber defenses, then reversed course with the ebb, using the swift current to speed their escape. English chronicles describe watching phantom ships drift backward against the wind, an image that terrified men ashore. Oh, there we have it. Sky charts read by crystal light, coastal silhouettes carved into memory, whispered horn codes, runic tide staffs, and hidden buoys all synchronized in a silent ballet of shadow and water. With these techniques, Vikings turned the vast night into a navigational ally, moving unseen where others would flounder. Now that we've charted the heavens and mastered the shore, it's time to slip from the water onto solid ground. Next, we'll explore how those ghost ships became ghostly footprints, unveiling the art of silent landings and covert disembarkation. Keep your breath steady and let the hush of night carry you deeper into our voyage as the longship cut through dark waters. The final approach demanded both precision and patience. Raiders studied coastal topography days in advance, scouting in daylight disguised as traders, memorizing every cove, jetty, and creek mouth. On the appointed night, the fleet glided in single file, bow lights extinguished, hulls riding the swell with barely a ripple. Tide runners. Early Norse pilots called certain channels tide runners, narrow passages where ebb currents flowed swift and silent. By aligning their drift with these currents, the longships needed only 3 or 4 gentle sweeps of the oar to cover hundreds of yards. Recorded in an Orkney saga, a fleet approached the Aberdeenshire coast on an ebb tide that spilled seawater back into the North Sea. Rowers rested, their oars stowed mid-shaft, and the ships slid in like living shadows, whined whisperers when a weak breeze blew offshore. Captains trimmed leather-damped sails to ride the sigh, balancing cloth and mast so that billow-induced creaks vanished. Woolen canvas held shape, yet breathed with the wind, reducing flapping noises to a faint susurrus. Raiders timed this sailing hush to coincide with gusts from inland valleys, masking the subtle sound of wood against water. Formation disciplined longships moved in staggered lines. The lead vessel paused 50 yards off, waiting for a hidden torch signal, then edged forward. The next ship held position at 3 oar lengths behind, each crew responding to silent drumbeats from beneath deck, soft knocks on wooden frames that set a heartbeat rhythm. This metronome guided uniform strokes, ensuring no ship surged ahead and risked discovery. Shadow mergers approaching nearshore reed beds. Lookouts dropped bundles of kelp overboard, creating trailing curtains that diffused moonlight reflections. At moments, crews intentionally lost the leading ship in these curtains for a heartbeat, then rejoined in perfect formation, the entire flotilla seeming to vanish into reeds. Villagers on shore later spoke of a single drifting reed mat, mistaking it for flotsam until axes rang out. Upon reaching just flooded beaches, the true test began, landing without a sound. Metal scavenger shore parties stripped the hull of non-essential metal-to-wood contact points. Copper nails holding decorative fittings were pried out, oarlock pins replaced with wooden dowels, and flint strike plates tucked below deck. This scavenging rendered the ship nearly free of clinking metal, a laborious task completed under torchlight on the evening before the raid. Boots of featherhide warriors wore boots crafted from deer hide so thin that each footfall pressed the grain into sand without a creak. Interior soles were padded with moss and sealed with fish oil, preventing slip and dampening any friction. In accounts from a 10th century Irish raid, monks reported hearing bare skin on wood, no boots, no thud, only the echo of flesh murmuring against boards, or dismounting oars were slipped free of their leather sleeves with silent pulls, then rested on deck racks padded with linden bark. Each oarlock, wrapped in wool, was stowed alongside. By the time the first warrior touched the planks, only the soft rustle of linen and leather greeted the sandbank. Silent shore parties raiding bands formed two-man teams, one carrying a weighted rope coil, the other a small spade. The rope served to secure bundles of plunder without dragging, and the spade dug shallow pits to sink torches, preventing unwanted light. Each pair moved in near-perfect harmony, crouching in reeds until the first signal, a single rap on the hull, sent them toward the target. Undercover exfiltration after grabbing spoils. Rearguard teams replaced plundered bundles with disguised sandbags padded with wool, preserving hull balance. This prevented a sudden draft change that might slow the ship's departure. Only when all teams returned did the fleet remount its oars, still wrapped in leather, and drift back into open water, carrying both loot. In the hush of night, TO masked their true landing zones. Vikings sometimes employed low-tech illusions, creating misdirection that lured defenders away. False fires in a Normandy raid of 841 AD, raiders lit small ring fires inland, using animal fat, soaked rags to create flickering orange glows. From the sea, these torches mimicked watchfires, drawing coastal guards miles upriver. Within minutes, defenders marched toward the false signals, leaving beaches unprotected. Meanwhile, longships slipped ashore behind drifting smoke plumes, mirror flashes polished bronze mirrors, often used by women in Viking society, doubled as signaling devices. Crews angled mirrors to catch distant lantern light, reflecting it back in coded flashes. A series of 3 quick flashes indicated all clear, while one long reflection warned of patrol boats. These mirror bursts blended into the night's natural luminescence, looked for like distant stars, and rarely raised alarm that conked like horns. Raiders hollowed ram's horns and carved tiny vents, tuning them to exhale a deep moan barely audible at 100 feet. In one Anglo-Saxon account, monks hearing a faint cry thought it was wind echoing through the harbor. When the horn fell silent, they chalked it up to a passing ghost. In truth, it was a cue: advance in pairs. Reed screens, bundles of tall reeds tied to hull sides, not only broke up the ship's outline, but also created a drifting screen of smoke when soaked in peat smoke residue. As the peaty fumes wafted ashore, they added a haunting odor, interpreted by defenders as bog gas or windswept marsh vapors, delaying any human response until axes fell to oh, there you have it. The final dance between ship and shore, a seamless blend of hydrodynamics, stealth gear, and psychological artifice. From slipping silent through tide runners, to boots that left no imprint, to fires that lured enemies astray, every element served one purpose: absolute invisibility. These tactics turned a simple beach landing into a ghostly performance, where ships breathed like shadows and warriors moved like whispers. Defenders awoke not to a clash of steel but to an eerie void. Plunder gone, valuables vanished, and only the scent of smoke lingering in the breeze. Yet even such perfect raids became templates for countermeasures, a topic we'll explore next. In the following segment, we'll study the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD as the quintessential example of these stealth landings in action, and then dive into how defenders adapted over centuries to reclaim their shores. Oh, rest your mind on the hush of peaty smoke and the glint of hidden mirrors. And join me as we turn history's page to the shockwaves born on the holy isle of Lindisfarne. In the summer of 793 AD, the holy island of Lindisfarne sat serenely off the northeast coast of England. A tidal causeway connected it to the mainland at low water, but most days the monastery floated like a candlelit ship upon the sea. Within its walls, monks devoted their lives to prayer, illuminated manuscripts, and the ringing of church bells that echoed across calm waters. Geographically, Lindisfarne offered both sanctuary and vulnerability. Its granite cliffs rose steeply on 3 sides, shielding the abbey from wind and waves. Yet the southern approach lay open, a shallow, sandy bay where longships could beach at flood tide. On clear nights, the monastery's torchlight could be seen from miles away, a beacon to ships at sea. Unlike inland fortresses ringed by walls or moats, Lindisfarne relied on spiritual protection and goodwill. Coastal watchers tended simple beacon fires, but no permanent garrison stood ready for war. Word of distant Norse raids had drifted across the North Sea, but the full horror of a targeted night assault had not yet reached the English shores. Shortly after dusk on June 8th, the first longship emerged from the gray horizon. Its battered sail hung limp against the mast, dripping tar that melded with the dusky sky. Rowers paused a few yards offshore, stares fixed on the dark silhouette of the priory. No horns sounded. No torch betrayed their presence at first. The monks heard nothing but the lapping tide and the distant hoot of an owl. Only when the high tide masked by the night slipped in did the fleet edge closer. The rhythmic motion of oars was imperceptible, each stroke muffled by leather oarlocks and oil-dampened blades. By flood tide's peak, 8 longships lay beached within arm's reach of the wooden quay. A single knock, a coded 2 taps on a hull beam, signaled the warriors ashore. Monks stirring in late-night prayers heard only a soft shhhhh as cloaked figures slipped across planks. One abbot, woken by a distant shuffle, peered through a window slit but saw only shadows merging with shadows. By the time he dared raise an alarm, Viking axes had already severed door hinges. The raid unfolded with chilling precision. 2 longships moved directly to the grain stores. 3 targeted the guest hall. The remaining 3 circled toward the scriptorium. Raiders in each team wore dark linen cloaks lined with wool, blending with the night's chill. Grain store assault. Warriors used curved billhooks, tools ordinarily for harvesting, to slice rope bindings on grain sacks. The quartermaster's teams had already labeled the heaviest sacks for swift carrying. As monks awakened, raiders loaded bundles onto small wooden sleds padded with wool, pulling them toward hidden docking points beyond the causeway. Guest hall incursion. Shield maidens advanced in pairs, sandals silent on stone floors. They placed soft cloth beneath doors to muffle breaches, then slipped inside. Their targets, coin chests and silver chalices. With each item cradled in leather wraps, they exited without a single metallic clang. Scriptorium plunder. In the scriptorium, berserkers moved like shadows among lecterns. They carried iron-bound chests for manuscripts, lightweight but strong. Using hidden rivet cutters, they split chest locks, then wrapped precious codices in sheep's wool. Their spoils included a gospel book with jewel-encrusted covers, carried off with solemn reverence rather than careless loot. Taking by dawn, the raiders had vanished. Monks discovered empty halls and silent shores. Pewter bowls lay overturned, pages fluttered in the breeze, but no footprints led inland. Coastal watchers raised the alarm bells only at first light, but the longships were already distant silhouettes on a rising tide. The shock reverberated across Christendom. Letters from Lindisfarne reached Canterbury within days, describing heathen men who came in stealth as wolves among sheep. King Athelred ordered coastal fortifications and called nobles to muster. Monastic chronicles recorded new watchtowers rising along the coast, and abbeys began stockpiling grain above high-water marks. Yet the raid's true legacy lay in its template. Night assaults became a hallmark of Viking strategy. Over the next century, abbeys at Iona, Jarrow, and Inishbofin all fell to similar tactics. Longships under moonless skies, cloaked crews, and silent landings. Defenders adapted with floating bells, submerged obstructions, and permanent garrisons, but the myth of Viking invincibility had given way to a more pragmatic wariness of the darkness. Oh, there we stand, on the blood-soaked sands of Lindisfarne, witnessing the birth of a ruthless art. The success of that midnight raid prompted an arms race of coastal defense, watchtowers, tide traps, and night watches, all designed to catch a shadow before it could strike. In our next segment, we'll delve into these countermeasures, from submerged stakes and floating bells to armed night rangers and coastal signal networks. We'll see how villages and kingdoms fought back, turning the tide on the longship raids that once crept in under cover of darkness. For now, rest in the silence of history's aftermath and prepare to witness defense rise from the embers of surprise. In the years following Lindisfarne's shock, coastal communities began to rethink their defenses. Rising from rocky promontories and sandy spits, wooden watchtowers sprouted like sentinels on the shore. These towers, often hexagonal in plan, were manned day and night by armed rangers who scanned the sea with longbows at the ready. By the late 8th century, beacon networks formed a relay of warning fires. A torch lit atop one tower would ignite a neighboring fire 3 miles down the coast, creating a glowing chain visible across dunes and inlets. Monks at Farne Island lit beacons when smoke drifted inland. Mainland watchers answered with their own bonfires. News of an approaching longship could travel 20 miles in 15 minutes, enough time for farmers to barricade their barns and for village militias to muster. Construction techniques evolved alongside these towers. Foundations sat on raised timber pilings driven deep into marshy ground, preventing tidal erosion. Inside, wooden floors were covered in rushes to muffle footsteps, and trapdoors allowed keepers to move unseen between levels. At the top, wind vanes and simple telescopes, lenses salvaged from monastery workshops, helped spot distant sails under moonlight. In Northumbria, King Athelred fortified 20 such towers along his coast, each linked by horn signals in case of beacon failure. One 9th century charter even stipulated fines for any keeper who allowed his fire to go dark, an early example of mandated coastal security, born from terror at a raid that unfolded too silently. Static towers could warn, but what about ships slipping silently beneath the tide? Enter the tide-driven bell. Communities began anchoring buoys just beyond harbor mouths. Bells hung from these buoys clanged when lifted by flood tides against submerged rocks. The gentle ring traveled on the water's surface, awakening guards without a sight to betray. However, clever raiders soon muffled these bells with leather hoods, rendering them mute. In response, defenders developed double bell systems, 2 small bells enclosed in wooden housings, 1 iron and 1 bronze. Leather covers dampened the louder bronze ring, but the lighter iron bell still chimed, a distinction that let watchers know if someone had tampered with the primary alarm. In the Firth of Forth, local shipwrights repurposed old anchor chains. Lengths draped beneath the tide line scraped against rocks as ships passed, creating a low rumble detectable even under heavy surf. This crude sonar system, what they called the sea spark alarm, warned of vessels carving through shallow channels after midnight. Written accounts from the 10th century describe a night when both bells and chains converged in chorus. A faint but unmistakable clamor rose above the waves, alerting coastal dwellers in time to ring the great monastery bell and raise the drawbridge before the raiders could land. Beyond static defenses and tidal alarms, communities organized armed night watches, militia. Units paid handsomely for their vigilance. Men swung iron-tipped lantern poles coated in pitch to protect them from damp, stamping their feet on wooden palisades to stay alert. These night watchmen trained under skalds, poet soldiers who taught them rhythmic chants keyed to footfall patterns, ensuring patrols marched in steady beats. Drums and low whistles signaled rotations every half hour, preventing monotony-induced lapses in attention. In some villages, watchmen carried sound poles, hollowed wooden staffs fitted with reeds at the top. A gentle hiss and creak alerted neighboring posts to movement. An acoustic network that covered marshy flats and dune ridges where visibility failed. Wild stories circulated of militia bands intercepting raiding parties in pitch dark. Torches flashed, and defenders unleashed volley after volley of firepots, clay jars filled with burning tar. The sudden blaze lit the sky like sunrise, disorienting raiders and sending them scurrying back to their ships. Chroniclers in Frisia noted that by 900 AD, well-organized night watches had repelled over a dozen raids, turning Viking tactics against themselves. Attackers expecting silent beaches found instead spiked pit traps, sharpened stakes hidden under blankets, and archers firing blind at every shadow. From watchtowers aflame to tide bells clanging, from chant-led patrols to impromptu trap networks, defenders learned to meet silence with vigilance and surprise with preparation. These countermeasures reshaped coastal life. Fishermen became lookouts, monks became signal keepers, and every shore held its own silent army. Yet the dance of shadow and light continued. For every innovation in defense, raiders devised a new trick, be it coated paddle sleeves, reed-dampened hulls, or faint fires that lured watchmen astray. This endless cycle of stealth and countermeasure forged centuries of maritime warfare, echoing long after the last longship slipped beneath dark waves. In our next and final segment, we'll step back to consider the enduring legacy of these night raids, how they shaped modern naval tactics, inspired legends, and left an indelible mark on the psyche of coastal peoples. So draw your blanket closer, breathe in the hush of history, and join me as we conclude our voyage through Viking night raids and their timeless echoes. Though the age of Viking longships ended over a millennium ago, their stealth tactics continue to influence modern naval doctrine. Today's Special Operations Forces study the Norse art of silent insertion, adapting centuries-old principles to rubber boats and stealth ships. In the late 20th century, naval strategists at the U.S. Navy's Special Warfare Center examined Viking raid accounts, noting parallels in night riverine operations during the Vietnam War. Small craft navigated narrow channels under cover of darkness, using muffled engines and low-profile hulls, techniques eerily similar to the Norse longships' low draft and leather-lined oars. Likewise, British Royal Marines drew inspiration from reed camouflage when designing jungle skirts for patrol boats in the Falklands, wrapping hulls in vegetation to break up outlines against shore. Such modern reedy skirts trace their conceptual roots to Scandinavian raiders who bundled reeds to hide their approach under moonless skies. Pop culture often romanticizes Vikings, horn-helmeted warriors drinking mead in grand halls, fearless and free. Yet historical records paint a bleaker picture. Silent terror, swift slaughter, and communities left destitute before sunrise. In the 21st century, series like Vikings and games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla weave myth and history, emphasizing spectacle over silence. Battle scenes erupt in midday light, crowds cheering amid fireworks. Rarely do we see the hush before the storm, the calculated patience, the muffled breaths, the unseen docks. Yet some creators strive for authenticity. Documentaries such as The Real Viking Raiders reenact night raids with historically accurate vessels, leather-sheathed oars, and low whisper voices. In one scene, actors don deer-hide boots and remove all metal fittings before boarding, moments that reveal the chilling precision behind every silent landing. The greatest legacy of Viking night raids may lie not in ships or weapons, but in psychological warfare. By attacking when and where victims felt safest, Norse raiders shattered the sense of security that daylight brings. Every rustle of reeds, every distant splash, became a cause for dread. Coastal communities adapted rituals, nightly prayers, whispered protective runes carved on doorframes, and the tolling of bells at dusk. Bards composed laments that invoked silent ships as harbingers of doom. These cultural responses endured in folklore. Tales of phantom longships gliding past church windows, of warriors who vanished with the tide as you drift towards sleep. Consider this. True power often lies not in force, but in subtlety, not in the clang of steel, but in the hushed whisper of strategy. The Vikings mastered the art of invisibility long before modern stealth technology, using wood, wax, leather, and reeds to turn simple vessels into specters of fear. Their legacy reminds us that sometimes the quietest footsteps leave the deepest mark. Thank you for joining me on this voyage through moonlit fjords and silent shores. If you found yourself entranced by the hush of history, consider subscribing and sharing these stories with fellow night owls. Next time, we'll sail into the moss-covered forests of the Norse sagas, exploring the daily lives of Viking settlers beyond the battlefield. Until then, rest easy under the blanket of stars, and good night.